All right, my friends. We got a good one. I haven't been excited about a video like this for a while. So I've got a curious tale. Well, let me go and take a step back and do a proper greeting. This is my Kwan. Gregorian calendar date Tuesday, February 27th, calendar year 2024. And as I was saying, I got a curious one. So I'm going to just jump right into it. All right, for those of you that have been following along since January of this calendar year, Christy and I have done a series of house sit assignments in the Harrisburg area. So I told the story of the demon dogs. This is Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. This is the Susquehanna River that runs through it. This is the capital of the Keystone State. State capital is in here. So this was the location of the demon dogs right here on the Yellow Breeches Creek, which then empties out into the Susquehanna. This is low on the ground. And we were there for 2 weeks in January. And then we went somewhere else. We left the immediate area, and then we returned back to the Harrisburg area on the 4th of February, and we stayed in this place in Enola, Pennsylvania, high up in the hills. So this is like low in the ground. This is high up in the hills. And here we house sat. House sitting is primarily pet sitting. And there were 2 Rottweilers here. And, if you've followed along, you know the story. And then in Enola, PA, there were two Saint Bernards. And I talked a lot about the demon dogs and, the guardians of the underworld. And, I talked about that. What's interesting about these dogs here is, one, it's like another pair of dogs of the same breed. So there's that. And then a Saint Bernard is, at least, in common mythology, if you will, Saint Bernards are kind of thought of to be like savior dogs. The idea with the Saint Bernard with a barrel of whiskey tied to his neck. I mean, that's a bit of a, that's not exactly how things worked, but it's a mythology which has been passed on to through culture. But anyway, so they still symbolize that as like kind of savior dogs, which is a little bit different than the demon dogs. And so we were there for 10 days in February, and then from there we went and we stayed at a friend of ours' place who lives also in the area, Ron. And this was kind of like the circulation which we did just a month ago. So, today's the 27th. So this is just 5 days after leaving this place. On like the 2nd or 3rd to the last night we were here. And you may hear some noise in the background. That's another dog, which I'm staying with right now. Come here, Zoe. She wants a little bit of attention. She was just whining a little bit because she wasn't getting any attention. Anyway, so I was staying at Ron's place, and I wasn't sleeping. It was at night. I was kind of lying awake, and I got this impulse while I was lying in bed that I should triangulate these locations. I mean, there's an element of total randomness, like these 2 places. We only stayed here because there were house sitting assignments that we could take, and we get that through a house sitting website. Theoretically, they could have worked out. They may not have worked out. There's all these kind of like random events, I suppose, associated with them. Like, we could have applied to these. We could have not applied. They could have accepted us, not accepted. But nonetheless, this came into fruition. And then Ron's place wasn't exactly random in the fact that I knew Ron and we were in the area and we needed a place to stay for for about 7 days, and so Ron's made sense. So anyway, so I'm lining it. So it's not totally random, but there's a high degree of randomness in this. And I wanted to see where it was triangulated around. I wanted to see the center point of where these triangles, or where these 3 points like made a triangle. And when I had that impulse, like I had no idea that it would line up like a triangle. I mean, I guess I kind of did, because I knew 2 were on one side of the river and 1 was on the other side, but I wasn't really certain what the relationship between geographically it was, like on this map, like, what's north, what's south, because I'm not really that familiar with this area. So anyway, to triangulate, you turn it into a triangle, and then what you do is from each one of these angles, you go to the midpoint of the opposite side. And when you do that, the 3 lines will intersect in the same place, and that is the triangle. So that's what we have right here. We can see this is where it's triangulated. Now, I'm not familiar with Harrisburg. I mean, I guess I do have a lens of like wanting to understand the geographical layout of movements. Like I find that compelling, but it's not like I do this everywhere I go. Like this is the first time I've ever actually done anything like this, and I had no idea what I would discover. But what I do know is there was like a very strong impulse within me to go and check this out. I mean, this is kind of like the same type of impulse that I've learned to trust, which has brought me to like the Susquehanna mystery and so forth. So anyway, let's keep on drilling in. So this is where those 3 lines intersect. And this is all kind of like, this is a screenshot from Google Earth, and then I have to overlay in a different program the shape. So it's not exactly like exact, but it's pretty close. Like it's probably within like 100 feet or so. And so this is where we see the intersection. And if you look closely, you can see there's this park and there's this lake right there. It's right by this lake. In fact, it's on this eastern corner. And so when we go and we look at that with higher resolution, we see this is the park, this is that lake, this is that intersection, and we see that it is right by these 3 named places in Harrisburg. First, the obelisk. Second, the Zembo shrine, and then third, the Scottish Rite cathedral. So I mean, I'm not that familiar with Harrisburg, but I recognize these names are like, okay, that's kind of a bullseye. That's a bullseye. If you look a little bit closer, like with the measuring tool, this point, which is just general, is 450 feet, a football field and a third distance. Like this is kind of a bullseye. There's like this, for some reason, the natural movements of the unfolding of life brought us around this. And so let's go look at each one of these individually. So the first one is the Dauphin County Veterans Memorial Obelisk. This is it, seen in 2022. 110 feet tall. That's about 11 stories. They built it right after the Civil War, and then it was relocated in 1960. So the location, this is not its original location, but it's here now, and it's in alignment with these two buildings, and we'll get to them in a moment. This is what it looks like. After years of exposure, the monument became damaged by passing vehicles and eroded by weather. A decision was made to refurbish it and relocate it. After thorough cleaning, the monument was moved to its present location at 3rd and Division Streets near the Zembo Shrine Building, the former William Penn High School, Mequon, Italian Lake in uptown section of Harrisburg. So this is talking about a little bit more detail about the obelisk. Influenced by the classic Roman Egyptian architecture and not unlike the Washington Monument, the Harrisburg obelisk was cut from stone, taken from the banks of the nearby Susquehanna River. So this is Susquehanna River stone, is this obelisk. Originally erected in the middle of the park, located in the North 2nd and State Streets intersection of downtown Harrisburg. So this is all Susquehanna River stone. This was it at its original location, and you can see where it was moved to. All right, let's go look at the second location. So that was right here, and this was my first thought. Like when I first was like trying to make sense of all this, like I'm like, that's weird. What is this telling me is the question, or, what is this exposing? What is this expressing? My first thought was, it's an obelisk, and an obelisk has certain Egyptian connotations. It certainly has Freemasonic connotations. But in light of the lens which I bring to reality, I've been talking a lot about the arrow, and as I discussed in a recent video, the arrow in the arrow circulation is also a furba, a tent stake, the world tree. It's all of these like very kind of like phallic symbols that are impregnating, if you will, or penetrating the surface of the earth, and it's creating this literal, metaphorical, spiritual ladder, if you will, to access the heavens and the underworld, while still being in this, like, what in this model being called like middle earth, if you will. And so I'm like, all right, there's something about all of this energy momentum going towards arrow circulation and the river and stars ceremony, and it seems like there seems to be a circulation already going around it. Triangle, probably, it's 3 points, but you know what I mean. So that's going to change in a bit, but let me go through the other two places before I make that turn. So the second place is called the Zembo Shrine Building. This is a picture of it. It was said to be built in 1928. The Zembo Shrine Building, also known as the Zembo Mosque, is a Masonic building located in the uptown neighborhood of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It is significant architecturally as it is an example of Moorish revival architecture. Construction on the edifice was started in 1928. The Zembo Shrine is affiliated with the Shriners International, a Masonic order and philanthropic organization. This is a Shriners Hall. The Shriners are, it's a Masonic organization. They wear fezzes, and they're often seen driving like tiny little cars. I should have slides of that, but where I'm staying right now in the River House, there's no internet, so can't do that. So it's Masonic, but it's a little bit of a different expression in that Masonic tradition. I don't think I'm really the right person to go and explain the differences between the Shriners and the Masons, but obviously they are, but they're also very related. So this is what's very interesting right here. The origin of the name Zembo was long thought a mystery. Its meaning was determined in 1977 when nobles of the shrine did research to establish the meaning and the origination of the title Zembo. So they're saying right here, so they're like in 1977, so theoretically 50 years later, so if this was built in 1928, 50 years later, the nobles of the shrine research established the name of the shrine was a friggin' mystery. How the hell is it a mystery? Like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's a mystery? It's only 50 years old. You don't think, like, the story that this was built in 1928 and they made all the plans, and they're like obviously they have a vision of the future that this would be in, the building would be in continuity under the influence of their Shriner fraternity. They're going to have like the founders notes for all future generations. Like that just makes total sense. And so like to not know what Zembo means, particularly just like 50 years later, that's 3 generations later. Like that's nothing, like in terms of like what these fraternities, they're supposed to be a continuity going back to antiquity. And you're telling me like they forgot the name of Zembo? It was a mystery in 1977. So it wasn't like they knew it in 1976 and forgot it and then found out a year before. Like it was long thought a mystery. Like for a very long period of time, no one knew what Zembo means. I suppose the reason why I'm finding this humorous is because probably like 2 or 3 years ago, there was a real character, Jesse, not Jesse the Mage, Jesse the Marine. He wove his way into the Susquehanna-Alchemy family, and he was lived outside of Harrisburg, and he was like nothing stopped him. I've never seen anyone who carries themselves with so much authority, like, you know, like has absolutely no problems calling the shots anywhere. But what's ridiculous is everyone coalesces with his demands. So anyway, so he was going into, and he was telling me about this years ago, and I did not know, I didn't go there, but I remember him telling me these stories. He would go into the Zembo shrine building and he would demand to speak to the person who could give like proof that this building was built in 1928. He was like, show me the blueprints. Show me how this building was built with 1928 technology. And I'm just passing this story along like secondhand. This was him telling me like about his adventures, but you know, I know him to be someone who who's telling an accurate depiction. He's saying like the guys who he's like barking these orders, and he's like a young man. He's like 28, 29 years old, big guy, intense energy, like barging into a place and like talking to a 90-year-old man who's at the front desk. He's like, I need to go and see these blueprints. And no one could ever answer his questions. That's the point of the story. No one could answer his questions. So when I see this like long a mystery, like no one knew what Zembo meant, like that's either it flies in the face of the story that this is built in 1928, or it supports the theory which Jesse was putting forth, is that this building is a Tatarian building from some time period long ago, or a dimension which has bled through, you know, whatever would be the explanation for Tataria. The mainstream story just doesn't make sense, but we're gonna continue to run with it. So sorry to go off on that tangent, but I don't know, it tickles my funny bone. When nobles and shrine did the research to establish the meaning of the origination of the title Zembo, during the research it was necessary to learn the hieroglyphics of the ancient Egyptian language. Why wasn't anything written in English? Why was it written in hieroglyphics? Like, what are... like, I want more detail. And what's interesting is this is a screenshot from the Zembo, the Shriner's website of the current website of the Zembo building. So this is like from... This is the official storyline. So they had to go, they had some clues, and it was literally written in Egyptian hieroglyphics, and no one ever knew about it until these guys in 1977 went and cracked the code. And what they found out was that Zembo confirmed the meaning of water spirit. And when I read that, I was like, whoa, because that is very complementary to the way I present the information, the perspective which I see the Susquehanna River as its relationship to the river goddess Sequana, and that Celtic perspective, that Welsh perspective of understanding water deities. And now we're seeing like this Zembo building is also like saying water spirit. That's what Zembo supposedly means. A fitting name for a group founded on the banks of the Susquehanna River. They're even indicating, like, very specifically, this water spirit is like it's taming, it's connected. I mean, it depends upon how you want to define what this building is, and we're going to get into some weird stuff in a moment, or we're going to go deeper with this. But somehow this building, this edifice, has some sort of relationship because it's being named to the river on this spiritual level. Confirmation was made by the Metropolitan Museum and the Smithsonian Institute of the United States and the Papyrus Institute of Cairo. So it's gotten the official seal of approval that Zembo means water spirit. So I started thinking that the obelisk, I'm like, that's what the circulation is. And then I did a little research, and I found out more, which we're going to cover in a moment. But I'm definitely this Zembo thing has something of significance. And then the last building in the area is the Scottish Rite Cathedral. So there's the obelisk, there's the Shriners, Zembo, Water Spirit Auditorium, and a Scottish Rite Cathedral, Scottish Rite being Freemasonic. And all of this is within probably 2 football fields of each other. And so this is what it looks like, the Scottish Rite Cathedral Masonic Temple. Just kind of like in my opinion, a real... like, architecturally speaking, it's deadening. Even this to a degree is a really poor, non-inspiring architecture. Like, architecture should do that. Architecture is meant to inspire and bring out the highest qualities within the people who reside within the architecture. And I'm no expert on Moorish revival, Moorish architecture in general, but I know that it's much more domed, and this is just so right-angled. Certainly there are right angles, but there's also, I believe, in many of the Moorish architecture, there is a dome. Maybe because the spiritual significance was because it's being tied directly by name to the water. The dome usually represents like a feminine quality. There's always a masculine symbol next to a feminine symbol in order to create a divine union of primordial opposing forces. Like that's the logic behind it. And this here is just, again, we've got all of this like kind of like communism architecture. This looks like communism architecture. I don't know when this was built. Maybe we'll get to that in a moment. But it's just, to me, it feels lifeless. This feels lifeless in a way, as lifeless as architecture can feel. Anyway, so let's keep on going with this. This is a broader picture of the cathedral. The Scottish Rite Cathedral in Harrisburg is a Masonic building located at 2701 North 3rd Street. It's home to the Valley of Harrisburg Consistory and the Concordant of Scottish Rite bodies, several Masonic lodges, York bodies, and Masonic youth groups. What a cathedral means is it is like a location which is open to a multitude of Freemasonic organizations. Fortunately, I don't have the year it was built. So anyway, this is what I was working with. So we leave the rock house, and we leave the rock house on the 22nd, and we started a small stay in the River House down in Lower York County, property which is right on the river. Property we have the tent up on, and we're actually house sitting here, ironically. And so we come down here, and it's really fresh in my mind, like, what is this? Like I'm trying to make some degree of, of a takeaway other than like, oh, that's an interesting observation about, us randomly in these homes, and yet they are so precisely located to symbols and buildings of organizations which have some sort of like complex meaning, to me at least, on a personal level. I just say that because of like the whole Freemasonic like presentation and all of that. And so we find ourselves in this house, the lower gorge of the Susquehanna River, and I literally have no phone service here, and so definitely no internet service. The house doesn't have any internet service. And it is like literally you are stepping away from the modern world. And I'm contemplating, I'm just thinking, I'm like, wow, what was that? What was that Harrisburg thing? What was that all about? And I'm here, and there's a rather extensive and unusual library of uncommon books. And so I'm looking through the library, and I'm just looking for something to kind of thumb through, not necessarily to read completely, but something I could just kind of thumb through. And I see this book right here, Gone to Croatan. And the reason why the title spoke to me is because I know Croatan was the word which was carved into the tree in the mythology of the lost colony of Roanoke. Like they wrote Croatan, and the lost colony in Roanoke plays an interesting place in the telling of the Susquehanna mystery. So I'm like, Gone to Croatan, like, I was kind of hooked with that. And the subtitle is Origins of North American Dropout Culture. So the book's kind of like it's a bit of a history book, and it's written from this very kind of like literal counterculture, anarchist sort of perspective. I myself, I don't really consider myself, I don't think of myself in terms of like genres. And I'm certainly not familiar with like dropout culture. Like I can imagine what that is. Like I'm aware of Jack Kerouac as a cultural icon, but I don't go much deeper than Jeopardy level. Like I haven't really like researched the history. It never seemed appropriate or the opportunity to come out. So when I see this book is called Going to Croatan, which speaks on like the synchronistic level and is talking about the origins of dropout culture, I'm like, all right, well, let me pick this book up. And I thumb through it, and there's some illustrations in there. And so here are two illustrations that immediately, like, after like picking up the book, like these illustrations really resonated deeply with the type of work which I've been involved with. First is this image. This here is the basis of this image right here. You can see superimposed on top of it, or is like right up here, right down here, and right here. But the background original image is this, which is, this is just a screenshot from Wikipedia, but it is the Rosicrucian Invisible College, the Invisible College of the Rosy Cross. And the Rosicrucian Invisible College is a concept, a metaphor, something which I speak about frequently, and I'm very familiar with this image. So to see it in this book, seemingly nothing to do with Rosicrucians, I'm like, okay, there's a something there. But this dropout culture has added new flavor. There's this owl at the top, which sits on top of the original image, which was more of like a biblical heaven, if you will, and it's covered with an owl, and and then we have this kind of like Appalachia or like colonial time frontiers house, and then we've got this. Looks like some like probably like indigenous Native American with this hat on right here, which actually looks like a fez to me. Maybe it's a what do they call those? Like a stovepipe hat. Abe Lincoln used to wear it. Anyway, so there's that. And so I'm like, okay, this is speaking. And the second image is this character right here. And the character is then drawn with their back. I've never seen the back of this character. I'm familiar with this character, but I'm not familiar with this perspective of the same one. And I don't know if the artist who updated or repurposed this image drew it or not, but nonetheless, we could see it's in this new sort of context. Here's a one-page slide which I made a while ago, and it says the Susquehanna warrior as a Rosicrucian crypto goddess. And so this is the image right here. Here's kind of a blow up. The Susquehanna warrior in the map of Virginia is both a visual wordplay on the Susquehanna River and an encrypted image of the goddess. Keep in mind that goddess worship was the practice of the Rosicrucian alchemists behind the map's creation. So I kind of go and show the history. This original drawing came from John White. I think it was maybe it was a painting. And this is supposedly straight from the Lost Colony of Roanoke. This is an updated version of it done by this dude, Theodore DeBry. And then you could see that this was the basis of the drawing of the Susquehannock warrior on the map of Virginia I make reference to so many times. Here's the bottom of this one pager, and I kind of like talk about who the characters are, but I mean, you could see right here, I made this in 2018. I made this 6 years ago. And so to go and see that character portrayed in here, I think was intriguing to me. Also, looking closely at this image right here, they have at the top this building, which it's not exactly the same. It's definitely a little bit more attractive. See the dome right here? You see all of the right angles, and then we have this dome on top. This is like traditionally how architecture would work, with like this very, what would be thought of as masculine, primordial masculine energy with the right angles, and then it is balanced with a dome or maybe like a reflecting pool or something that would be symbolic of the feminine. Like that's always in play in this sort of what we would call classical architecture. So anyway, so where am I with all this? So I pick up this book. I see all of these things that are in alignment with the Susquehanna River and with all this sort of stuff, which I am keeping my mind occupied with. And then I start reading this book. I'm like, okay, let me go read this book. And the book it's a series of essays. Every chapter is a different essay, kind of focused on different parts of history. But the first two chapters, maybe the first three chapters, really go into Ben Ishmael and the Ishmaelites. And I was aware of Ben Ishmael as like a person of historical significance, but again, like I wasn't deep with that knowledge. Like it was like Wikipedia knowledge. I've never really like gone deep into it. So let me read to you a little bit about Ben Ishmael right now. Let's see, that may have been too big. The tribe of Ishmael, or Ishmaelites, was a tightly knit nomadic community of African, Native American, and poor white descent, estimated to number about 10,000. So this is nomadic. 10,000 people friggin' moving around. And it's a mixture of African, like freed slaves, Native American who did not go west, and then like European indentured servants who are like in North America, in the colonies, who are like, what are we, we're not part of that system. Fugitives from the South, they arrived in the central part of the Old Northwest at the beginning of the 19th century. So this is the 1800s. So 1800s, you got 10,000 of these people just kind of like moving around. Preceding the other pioneers, after a century of fierce culture conflict with the majority society, the tribe was forcibly dispersed. So from the early 1800s to the early 1900s, there was fierce culture conflict between the developing colonized culture of the Midwest and these 10,000 strong nomadic folk. The earlier migrations of the tribe had been involuntary, but they now pursued a nomadic way of life as a central feature of their distinctive culture. Their annual migratory route was northwest from Indianapolis to Kankakee River south of Lake Michigan. From there, south through eastern Illinois to the vicinity of Champaign-Urbana and Decatur? I think that's how I pronounce it. And finally due east, back to Indianapolis. This triangular route is about 350 miles as the crow flies. Every spring, many hundreds of small carts set off, filled with children and the elderly, drawn by donkeys or horses, usually scrawny in the latter years. The Ishmaelite men and women walking alongside. In the late spring, until the Indian removal in the north of the 1830s, there was a joyful reunion with the Native Americans of Kankakee. During the summer, the tribes moved south, and when the fall came, they turned again to winter quarters. The migration was repeated every year for nearly a century. So this 350-mile, this is aero circulation, move of 10,000 people. This is 200 years ago in America, the United States, if you will. Moving around, and circulating a specific part of the world. Already mentioned was James Whitcomb Riley's Little Orphan Annie. So if you know like Annie the musical, like this is what they're talking about. The origin of Annie the musical was like a cartoon, I believe from like the 20s. I believe that's when it started. So this guy's Little Orphan Annie, and so maybe it even started as a short story. I don't know. I'm no Little Orphan Annie expert. So Little Orphan Annie, who came to stay as a bound girl and terrorized her master's children with supernatural lore. So what they're saying is like Little Orphan Annie was an Ishmaelite. And you'll understand, I think, once we get to the end of this reading, like the context of how that the structure of that sentence goes. Well, let me continue. That she was an Ishmaelite is supported by her characterization as a little gypsy and from a wild country settlement. The Ishmaelites were gypsies. They were like wild people, like feral in the best expression. From a wild country settlement in Riley's essay, which amplifies the poem. So I guess, like Little Orphan Annie, I guess, began as a poem, and then it became the comic strip, which then became the musical, which then became like, what we think of as Little Orphan Annie nowadays in contemporary culture, or like, the Annie character. I think even Lindsay Lohan, I think if my memory's correct, Lindsay Lohan became famous because she was a little girl playing Little Orphan Annie on Broadway or something. But she was originally an Ishmaelite, which was, anyway. A much more significant use of the tribe of Ishmael in literature is not a regional work, but a classic of national literature, James Fenimore Cooper's novel, The Prairie. The tribe, identified by name, is the center of the action and theme. So it says right here, James Fenimore Cooper wrote his book called The Prairie, and it was all about the Ishmaelites. So just in case if you're not aware, the Susquehanna River begins in Cooperstown. Cooperstown is where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. Cooperstown is this like very like charming hamlet, New York hamlet, very well-to-do, a one-time significant location of the the Confederacy, the Iroquois Confederacy. And it's called Cooperstown because it was founded by James Fenimore Cooper's grandfather. James Fenimore Cooper is the Cooper in Cooperstown. He grew up in Cooperstown. He writes about Cooperstown. And so on a synchronistic level, like in this this essay on the tribe of Ishmael, there is like an implied connection to the Susquehanna River directly. I guess that did make sense, implied directly. An Ishmaelite could be seen at one time as a childish, but, oh God, how do I pronounce this word? Lascivicious? It sounds like English is my second language. I read it in 8th grade English level. I know I'd recognize what that word is if I heard it. Anyway, a childish but lascivicious Negro, a violent and savage Indian, a shiftless and feeble-minded poor white, and most unspeakable, a mongrel product of the defilement of racial purity. This was a deadly mix that conjured up the nightmarish events of the war upon the Ishmaelites. To the majority of people, the shanty towns became a scandal. The annual migration and invasion by the grasshopper gypsies, as they were called, and both were a cause of trouble for the authorities and alarm for the citizenry. It is appropriate, not coincidental, that what came to take on world significance a battery of genetic theories and eugenic proposals in the service of scientific racism can be historically traced to the war on the Ishmaelites as one of its earliest sources. In 1905, a bill was introduced by the Indiana legislature, and in 1907, the first compulsory sterilization law in the world was enacted by the state of Indiana. All right, that was a sharp pivot. So this essay is from that book. I found it online, and I read it just to kind of give like this a summary of like Ishmaelite, at least culture, as this nomadic culture, like 10,000 people moving all around what we now think of as Indiana and Illinois. And their culture, their gypsy culture, met face to face with the colonization and the urbanization of, Chicago and, all the small towns and medium cities and so forth of Illinois and Indiana, Indianapolis being one of them as well. And this lifestyle, this dropout culture, this is why it's part of like the history of the dropout culture, the dominant culture, they passed laws to say like, yeah, we can legalize, sterilize this group of mongrel people, this triracial. That was another descriptive word, term which I read over and over in these essays, is like triracial, and that created the justification for eugenics. And so Ishmaelites not only are a representation of a nomadic, like large-scale nomadic culture in North America in at least the recent past, we also see like it played a significant role in the eugenics movement. So you know that if you're familiar with eugenics movement history, it's all Rockefeller and Ford Foundation funded, and then it became the basis of what would become part of the social policies of the Fourth Reich. Assuming all of the history that we're taught is accurate, but that's the history we're taught. So Benjamin Ishmael. I found I found three different like kind of pieces of information online of his history, but Benjamin Ishmael, the original founder, the patriarch but it wasn't a patriarchal movement. I mean, you could read a lot about the movement. Their value systems and culture was very, very different than our current one. But Benjamin Ishmael was a Pennsylvanian. Like here we see that his birthplace was Franklin County. We can see right here Bedford County is also mentioned as being connected to Benjamin Ishmael, but also Cumberland County. And these are all like three adjacent counties in the same sort of area of Pennsylvania. Let me read a little bit more. The tribe of Ben Ishmael is even mentioned in Fenimore Cooper's 1872 novel, The Prairie, as a family man called Ishmael Bush, though the tribe is mostly white in the book. I'm pretty certain the Bush family actually has connections to Indianapolis. I know they do. They have connections to Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company. And I think that's Indianapolis based. I'd verify it if I had internet connection, but I'm just going by memory right now. But anyway, their origins are inexact, but they are said to have been fugitives from slavery and the Indian Wars from various points in Tennessee, the Carolinas, Virginia, and Maryland, all seeking asylum and converging in Kentucky. Such as an explanation suggests that they did not represent splintering branches of previously formed transracial groups in the Southeast, such as the Melegians, but a community as a transracial, transcultural project developed in Kentucky itself. So in Kentucky is where the Ishmaelites really formed. Ben Ishmaelite is Pennsylvanian in terms of his genealogy, but the movement really began, I guess, in Kentucky, and the movement begins this arrow circulation. We're going to get to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. When the noble Drew Ali left Newark for Chicago in 1925, he gave his reason the opinion that the Midwest was closer to Islam. He might have been referring to the Egyptian Shriners, but he may have also meant Ishmaels or both. An Ishmael woman with the delightful nomadic name of Miss Galavant passed down a tradition that the Ishmaelites were among Drew Ali's first converts in the area. Noble Drew Ali is the founder of the Moorish Science Temple of America. If you're unfamiliar with the Moorish Science Temple, it is an Islamically influenced movement that became popular in the mid to 1900s in America. So I am right now admittedly in over my head as it relates to this topic. So I can give kind of like a Wikipedia explanation, but it's a fascinating school of thought, and one which my only opinion is I know that it's well studied. And the idea is that the original Middle East is found in North America, and the North America is primarily originally like an Islamic nation. And we talk about the Moorish sciences, the Nation of Islam. A lot of these movements are inspired by either directly or indirectly the Ishmaelites, and it deals with this idea of a Moorish past in the United States, which I don't necessarily have conclusions, but this idea of this temple and like what I was triangulating, circling around, seemingly had a Moorish connection, and then bumping into this. As I said, Ishmael originally is from Pennsylvania, and they listed two counties, Bedford and Franklin. But the other county often mentioned, and I thought I had a screenshot of it, but I don't, but it mentions Cumberland County. This is Cumberland County right here, and Cumberland County is the adjacent county to where all of this triangulation, this is Harrisburg right here, here's the Susquehanna River. So, all right, let's go look at this map of the migration patterns of the tribe of Ishmael. And so this is, you know, a map of the area. And let me do it's the tribe of Ishmael. It's their migration patterns from 1785 to 1905, direction and approximate location of routes. You know, you can see it's really cool looking map with lots of details. And in the center of the map shows this. This is Indianapolis. This is the town of Morocco. This is the town of Muhammad, like Muhammad. And they would go in this triangular fashion, and this is how they would spend, they would do winter in Indianapolis and then spend spring, summer, and fall on this 350-mile route, which is walked. And they're walking around this holy mountain of harmonics. So I'll read a couple things that are written here. The Moore Science Temple at Pembroke is a small African-American town. The formula for the Holy Mountain configuration is supposedly contained in the odd dimensions of the so-called cube built by Abraham and Ishmael. I did a little bit of research into this Holy Mountain of Harmonics, whatever this is, whether it's like something that's literal, I don't know. But we know that this is a physical place, and we can see there's this like this arrow circulation, this triangulation, this movement. And so this is resonating very, very deeply with a lot of the ideas which I've been sharing and putting forth as it relates to Susquehanna-alchemy. The other thing I want to say, this Tippecanoe. This is going to be the off chance. I know there's a guy, I think it's called Tippecanoe Herbs, and I know he is a big supporter of Chance Garton's Inverse podcast. But I'm assuming that guy, Tippecanoe, lives in this area, and if he by any chance happens to be watching this video, I would love to know like what he knows of this place. Interestingly, Indianapolis, I've done like 4 shows on Indianapolis. I've done shows with Ross Ben. I've also done shows with Emily for very, very different reasons. And so there's something there which seems to be resonating. But I want to begin to wrap up this video by showing you this map. So I've translated this into something more like, at least in like our Google map description of like, you know, how physical reality looks. This is Morocco right here. This is Mohammed right here. And this is Indianapolis. And it says, this is their movement. You know, it shows it in this very kind of like almost equilateral triangle sort of fashion. But if you take away, you know, this is that migration shown on the map, but if you actually go and you look at the locations of these cities, I put it on a little bit of a larger scale than here. You can see there's Indianapolis. You can see that Muhammad is just to the upper left from Champaign, and then Morocco is located like at this 45-degree angle from this road's almost 90-degree bend. You can see all of those markers right here. Champaign, we got this, we've got that marker right there, we got Indianapolis. And if we go and we triangulate this, you're like, okay, this is actually what the triangle looks like. And so what I did was, I took this original triangle, this shape right here, and I just kind of cut that out. And then I took this triangle and I cut that out and I put it on this slide and I put them right next to each other. And it's not exactly the same, but the proportions are They're pretty close. So it's with that, my friends, that I'm gonna wrap this up for right now. I don't have a conclusion. I'm not certain where I'm going with it, but there seems to be a there, and it seems to be tying up in real time as to all of the events and all of the actions which we're planning on doing this summer and this spring. So thank you for coming along with me on this ride, and I'll keep you posted. Thank you.